Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 421, That Fishing Line. Mo Fang's body exploded into pieces. However, his flesh and blood did not disappear, but rather congealed together. In the blink of an eye, it formed 8 flood dragon heads. Another moment later, a 300-meter-long, 8-headed flood dragon was there in front of Mozi. Mozi's eyes were bright red as he lifted his head back and howled. The flood dragon in front of him let out a roar as it sped toward the incoming flying rain dragon. "Kill them!" cried Mozi frenziedly. The 8-headed flood dragon was much different than an ordinary flood dragon and was just barely able to stand up to the pressure exerted by the flying rain dragon. It charged forward with a howl, then slammed into the flying rain dragon. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he watched on coldly. The surrounding dragoneers observed the scene with shock. Outside of the Golden Shield, the members of the 5 great tribes were panting. All of them were paying close attention to this battle of dragons. A boom rose up into the sky, along with a miserable shriek. 3 out of 8 of the flood dragons' heads transformed into clouds of blood and gore as the flying rain dragon swallowed them up. The remaining 5 heads let out frantic cries and tried to bite the flying rain dragon. The flying rain dragon lifted its head up to the sky and roared. It sounded as if its dignity had been encroached upon. Its body began to grow larger until it was several hundred meters larger. Then it slammed once again into the flood dragon. Everything shook as a massive explosion rippled out. The rest of the flood dragon's 5 heads let out shrieks, and its entire body trembled. Looks of terror appeared on its faces, and it was just beginning to retreat when a huge boom could be heard. The entire flood dragon began to explode into blood and flesh. In response, the flying rain dragon sucked all of it in and swallowed it in one huge gulp. Mozi was scared out of his mind. His brain spun as he backed up. "I forfeit," he cried, completely overcome by his terror. It was at this moment of crisis that a golden light swirled out toward him from the Golden Shield, preparing to pull him out of the platform. The flying rain dragon roared again. Suddenly flames appeared, as if its body were about to burn up. The flames rose up into the sky as the flying rain dragon shot toward Mozi. The instant Mozi was about to be pulled out from within the Golden Shield, the flying rain dragon slammed into the golden light, blocking it. "When Meng Hao wants to kill someone, nobody can interfere," said Meng Hao coolly. He slowly lifted his right finger. Immediately, the image of a greenwood tree became visible on his forehead. Wood-type power emanated out, following the direction of Meng Hao's finger to shoot toward the Golden Shield. Because the Golden Shield was made up of wood and metal-type energy, the power of the greenwood tree caused it to begin to ripple and distort. The flying rain dragon stretched its head out. Just when Mozi was heaving a sigh of relief as he thought he was about to escape, everything went black. That was because the flying rain dragon's mouth had latched onto him. A miserable shriek could be heard from Mozi, which was cut off by crunching sounds. The top half of Mozi's body was swallowed down by the flying rain dragon. This was what it meant to break the fangs. The flying rain dragon slowly dissipated. The shocking scene immediately caused a huge commotion among the members of the 5 crow divinity tribes outside of the Golden Shield. Here's a grand dragoneer. That dragon. What kind of dragon is it? I've never seen a neo-demon like that before. Even the ancestral shield was powerless. Mozi obviously forfeited, but still got killed. Slowly, the eyes of all the tribe members came to rest on Meng Hao. The great father of the Crow Scout tribe stared in shock, panting. The Sky Priest quickly looked over at the great father, who looked back. Both of them could see the astonishment in each other's eyes. Both were thinking exactly the same thing: Grand Dragoneer. He must have been injured in the past, and that's why his neo-demon could only appear in illusory form. He's currently incapable of summoning its true form. They weren't the only ones thinking along these lines. Apparently, the great fathers and priests from the other tribes were all coming to the same conclusion. The Grand Elder of the Crow Scout tribe took a deep breath as he looked at Meng Hao. No longer were his eyes filled with hostility and contempt. Instead, he now looked at Meng Hao as if he were looking at someone of similar status to himself. Wu Ling was panting, her face flushed with excitement and hands clenched into fists. She was once again reminded that Grandmaster Meng was the most powerful person she could rely on in her attempts to raise herself and Wu Chen to prominence within the tribe. As for Wu Chen, his eyes were filled with zeal. In his eyes, Meng Hao wielded the might of the heavens. There was no one whom he had esteemed more in his entire life. As for the man-form outlander beast, he stood there with wide eyes, muttering to himself. Everyone else had similar reactions. This was not to mention all of the people inside of the Golden Shield. Jiu La took a deep breath, and his eyes filled with pain. At long last, he had resigned himself to his fate. A figure as powerful as Meng Hao was not someone who he could afford to provoke. There was really no other option than to just accept his lot. At the same time, he was actually somewhat happy. The young master has grown even stronger. It seems following him won't be such a bad choice. His eyes turned to the side thoughtfully as he considered how to perform some meritorious deed that would propel him up from being little more than Meng Hao's zookeeper. It was at this moment, when everyone was still in the throes of shock, that the old woman, the white-haired old man, and the dragoneer dressed like a fisherman all made a move at the same time. Their neo-demons roared as they shot toward Meng Hao, who was now without his illusory flying rain dragon. Looks of greed could be seen in their eyes. As dragoneers, they were able to read between the eyes. They knew that something was wrong with Meng Hao's illusory dragon neo-demon. It couldn't exist for very long before disappearing. If they could kill Meng Hao, then they would be able to seize the rest of his neo-demons. He's an injured Grand Dragoneer. He wields the might of a Grand Dragoneer, however, he is not like the true legendary Grand Dragoneers who are impossible to kill. To run into an injured Grand Dragoneer like this is actually good fortune for me. The three people who attacked did so in unison, clearly having reached a common understanding. As for Jiu La, he had only been a part of the 5 Crow divinity tribes for a short time. The other Dragoneer vassals were not very familiar with him, and therefore, did not include him in their decision. As they attacked, Meng Hao turned, cold, killing intent radiating from his eyes. He waved his right hand, causing the eyeless lava totem tattoo to spring into action. Strands of silk flew out to surround him. Meng Hao didn't move at all as the attacking neo-demons from the other 3 Dragoneers screamed toward him. "Shameless!" shouted Wu Ling furiously, her expression one of anxiety. The others from the Crow Scout tribe looked completely indignant. The Great Father and the Sky Priest, even the Grand Elder, all flew up in the air to go rescue Meng Hao. Unfortunately, they were immediately obstructed by the Great Fathers and priests from the other tribes. Meanwhile, up on the platform, Jiu La watched as all of this was happening. His face flickered, and without hesitation, he sent his neo-demon horde whistling through the air toward the other 3 Dragoneers. At this critical juncture, a massive roaring sound ripped out through the air from the direction of Meng Hao. The source of this sound was none other than the strands of silk from the eyeless lava, which spun rapidly through the air. Suddenly, they shot outward in all directions, slashing through the incoming neo-demons and turning them into a cloud of blood. Moments later, Meng Hao strolled out from within the sea of blood. Silk continued to spin around him as he looked coldly at the 3 who had just attacked him. As for them, their faces flickered and they began to step backward. It was at this point that the old woman's eyes flickered with anger. Suddenly, the giant Cyclops ape which she had held in reserve charged an attack toward Meng Hao. "Wild giant," said Meng Hao, his voice indifferent. Immediately, the wild giant roared and dashed forward. It directly picked up the giant Cyclops ape and then viciously bit into the creature, sending blood spraying everywhere. As the Cyclops ape screamed, the old woman's face twisted. She was about to try to retreat when a white flash of light appeared. Suddenly, Big Hairy was standing behind her, his eyes cold and grim. Without hesitation, he savagely bit down onto the woman's neck. She wanted to struggle, but then the black bat appeared. Its fangs sank into her, and she let out a blood-curdling scream as her life force was sucked away. In the blink of an eye, she was turned into a withered corpse. Even as this was happening, the transcendent, white-haired old man atop the white crane shot toward the golden shield in an obvious attempt to flee the platform. As soon as he appeared outside, he looked back at Meng Hao, his face pale. He then let out a sigh of relief. Back atop the platform, Meng Hao ignored the man and began to walk toward the old fisherman. However, at the same time, he said, "Parrot." Immediately, the large man who was standing among the Crow Scout tribe members outside the shield let out a roar and charged toward the old man who had just emerged from the shield. The man's cry of alarm turned into a miserable shriek as he was torn to pieces. As for the white crane, its cries were even more blood-curdling. Back on the platform, the other weaker dragoneers were all fleeing. The only ones who remained were Meng Hao, Jiu La, and the old fisherman. The old fisherman's face was ashen and filled with astonishment as Meng Hao strode toward him. It was as if Meng Hao's feet were trampling upon his heart and mind. He felt an increasingly intense pressure, and was well aware that he could not flee in this situation. He also knew that even if Meng Hao was an injured Grand Dragoneer, he still was not someone who could be provoked. However, the fisherman also knew that this was a critical life-or-death moment. The fight to survive lit his eyes. He waved his right hand, causing his enormous earthworm to let out a vicious shriek. At the same time, the countless earthworms within the magical silt suddenly flew up and attached themselves onto the giant earthworm. Now they were tentacles, making the giant earthworm look even more ferocious. At the same time, the old fisherman spit up a mouthful of blood and then began to perform an incantation with both hands. "Occult karma magic," he cried. Immediately, the enormous earthworm lowered its head, opened its mouth and did something that came as a complete shock to all the onlookers. It swallowed the old fisherman whole. After that, the top of the earthworm's head began to bulge, and suddenly the face of the old fisherman appeared there. "I can't hope to fight back against a Grand Dragoneer," he cried. "But this occult karma magic that I acquired years ago allows me to merge my body with a neo-demon and become a new life form. Even if you are a Grand Dragoneer, you can't fight me now." Meng Hao's expression flickered, and he immediately retreated, an expression of unprecedented seriousness filling his face. His cultivation base was now in full rotation, and his eyes shone with a bright gleam. What he was looking at was, not the old man, but something else up in the air. What had caught his attention was actually the occult karma magic. Within this occult magic, Meng Hao could sense the aura of the Ji clan. Suddenly, a gigantic vortex appeared up in the sky, within which a silver string appeared that looked very much like a fishing line. It shot down toward the old man who had merged with the earthworm. 1. This will surely cause some readers to recall a scene from chapter 307. Instantly, everything went silent. Meng Hao noticed with astonishment that everything, including the Great Fathers, were all completely motionless. It was as if everything in the entire world had been frozen in place. It was like everyone in the world had become fishes on the chopping block, just waiting for that fishing line to hook them and take them away. Apparently, he was the only person in the world capable of seeing this silver thread. Chapter 422. Karmic Severing. The world was silent. Nothing moved. Even the golden shield seemed to have become part of this perpetuity. The rays of light shining out from it also stopped moving. The members of the 5 great tribes in the area were all like clay statues, absolutely motionless. Even the old man who had used the occult karma magic to merge into the gigantic earthworm was frozen in midair like a statue, a maniacal laugh plastered onto his face. The only things that could move were Meng Hao and the silver line in the air. A profound sense of danger appeared in Meng Hao's mind. One of the main reasons he had been forced to flee the southern domain and go into hiding was the Ji clan. And yet here again they appeared in the sky above the western desert. Silver light floated lazily off of the line as it whistled down from up above. Ripples emanated out that seemed capable of ripping apart the very air. As it turned out, Meng Hao was not the target. Instead, the line hooked up the old earthworm man. This all happened in front of everyone present, although it seemed they weren't able to see it happening. Meng Hao started to breath heavily. He didn't dare to move. He stood in place, watching, trying to look exactly like everyone else. He remained completely motionless, attempting to not even think. He could see that at the end of the silver line was a hook. The hook was currently stabbing effortlessly through the body of the earthworm, piercing all the way through. It was almost like the old earthworm man was now bait on the hook. Meng Hao's mind spun and his heart was pounding. It's not a thread, it's a fishing line, the same type you would use to go fishing. Meng Hao remained motionless, but was able to clearly see everything happening. After the old earthworm man was completely stabbed through by the hook, he was suddenly wrenched up into the sky. Suddenly, an archaic voice could be heard from up above, where the fishing line originated from. In a leisurely tone, it said, "So, it turns out there are cultivators in the Western Desert who practice occult karma magic. Turned your body into bait, huh? I guess I can use you to go fishing. Maybe I can snag a big fish from the Western Desert. Since you're fish bait now, you have no need for karma." As the voice echoed out, Meng Hao was astonished to find that he could suddenly see threads attached to the bodies of everyone present. They were faint, indistinct, and flickering, and seemed to contain fate itself. If you looked closely, all of the threads seemed to be connected to each other. Regardless of neo-demon or cultivator, even the mountains and rivers, all things in the world, were filled with vast quantities of these threads. They spread out, connected together, even to the earthworm man up in the air. Everything and everyone was connected together into something like an enormous, living web. Anything seen or remembered caused a merging of karma strings, connecting everything. "Henceforth, let your karma be extinguished," said the ancient voice in the sky. Suddenly, Meng Hao could see that the threads attached to the earthworm up in the sky were suddenly beginning to collapse and be destroyed. As these threads of fate were being eliminated, it caused a huge chain reaction. All of the other threads connected to everything else, mountains, rivers, the land, the neo-demons, the cultivators, began to tremble. Even more shocking to Meng Hao was that the surrounding cultivators were all trembling, and their faces were pale. The threads attached from them to the earthworm began to shatter into pieces. It wasn't all the threads attached to everything. Rather, any connection or memory they had regarding the existence of the old earthworm man was collapsing. Now it seemed as if the balance of karma had been disturbed. By forcibly erasing the karma that had been sown, it affected the rest of karma in all creation. It was at this moment that Meng Hao's mind began to tremble. He had just noticed that the threads attached to his own body were trembling and seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. An unspeakable power seemed to be spreading out through the world. It seemed any vestige or memory of the old earthworm man was being completely wiped out. Even as his mind reeled, the demon's sealing jade suddenly began to vibrate inside his bag of holding. A warm, gentle power emanated out from it to envelop Meng Hao's entire person. It appeared as if the threads attached to Meng Hao were collapsing, but in truth, as that massive power washed over him, the memories of the old earthworm man were not wiped away. Suddenly, the earthworm man up above transformed into a beam of light that shot up into the sky and then disappeared. Finally, the previously still world once again began to move. As things returned to normal, everyone shuddered. The golden light once again emanated up around the platform. Jiu La had a look of confusion on his face, which was quickly replaced with happiness. With a loud shout, he proclaimed his forfeiture, after which he was enveloped by golden light and pulled off of the platform. Nothing existed in his memories regarding the old fisherman. He only remembered Meng Hao's fabulous victory over the other dragoneers. Outside of the golden shield, the great fathers of the 5 great tribes were completely recovered. All of them had different expressions as their gazes came to focus on Meng Hao. Their memories did not contain anything regarding the old fisherman either. It was as if the old fisherman had never even existed. The Crow Scout tribe has recruited a Grand Dragoneer. The Crow Scout tribe must have paid a hefty price in preparation for this ancestor right competition. Otherwise, they would never have been able to convince a Grand Dragoneer to work for them. As the buzz of conversation rose up from the members of the 5 great tribes, Meng Hao stood on the platform, his face ashen. Nobody that he could see looked even a little bit different than from before. In fact, it seemed as if none of them were even aware that everything had stopped moving moments ago. Furthermore, they had no reaction whatsoever to the sudden disappearance of the old earthworm man. Apparently, his life did not exist at all within their memories. It seemed as if all the causes and effects of the old man's karma had been completely severed from everything, the neo-demons, the mountains, the rivers, and even the land. Not a trace remained of him in any consciousness whatsoever. Meng Hao looked around, panting, face pale. An unprecedented feeling of fear filled him. Now that is death, true death. To be erased from the memory of anyone you ever met, as if you had never existed in the world. So that is the karma line of the Ji clan. Suddenly, Meng Hao recalled the fishing rod in his bag of holding, the one he had acquired when he slayed one of the sons of Ji. Now he understood the function of that rod. He also realized that if that fishing line had come for him, and hooked him instead, then perhaps all traces of his own existence would have been erased from the world. The Ji clan. Meng Hao's face was pale. He waved his right hand to collect up his neo-demon horde, then strode off of the platform. The wild giant accompanied him as he left. Meng Hao paid no attention to the gazes and words directed toward him. Instead, he looked up into the sky, his face unsightly. Of course, no one could understand what he was feeling. Even the parrot seemed unaware of what had just happened. Perhaps this wasn't because the parrot wasn't powerful enough, but rather because it didn't care enough about the old earthworm man to notice. Perhaps it had even been willing to allow it to happen. Maybe it would have been different if the karmic severing was directed at someone important to it. Finally, Meng Hao looked back at the members of the 5 Crow divinity tribes who stood around him. As of now, everyone had to admit that the Crow Scout tribe had clearly won the right to be the first to enter into the Crow divinity Holy Land. Using their bloodline powers along with a special technique, the 5 tribes of the Crow divinity fully opened the Crow divinity Holy Land. The Crow Scout tribe members cheered as the Great Father and the Sky Priest politely clasped hands and offered thanks to Meng Hao. After that, all of the Crow Scout tribe members, along with Meng Hao, turned into colorful beams as they shot toward the golden light. Up ahead, the tall platform was fading away, replaced by 2 massive doors that were slowly opening. In front of the doors, the Great Father clasped hands to Meng Hao and the man-form Outlander Beast. Many thanks, Grandmaster Meng and fellow Daoist Out. In accord with our promise, you may follow the tribe members to enter the pool of destiny. Meng Hao nodded distractedly as he looked at the opening doors. The karma line of the Ji clan is so powerful. Being destroyed by it actually erases every trace of your existence. Wow! Meng Hao was lost in thought as the massive doors opened within the golden light. When they were about half opened, Meng Hao suddenly felt a tremor running through him. He couldn't stop his face from flickering. That was because he had suddenly been struck with a new realization. Oh no! The karma line severs karma, completely erasing it. It prohibits anything from remembering what was severed. That is a complete erasure. However, if someone happens to remember something about the person who was erased, that would mean that the technique was incomplete, not perfect. Essentially, it means the technique failed. Not good. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Meng Hao's face completely fell. He could imagine a situation in which whoever it was that employed the technique detected the fact that it had in fact failed. He had little time to continue thinking about the matter. His body flickered as he shot toward the huge doors. Almost the instant he flew forward, the entire world suddenly grew still. Suddenly, the fishing line which had so recently disappeared, could be seen again up in the sky. This time, it was shooting down toward Meng Hao. So a little fish slipped through the net, said the archaic voice, chuckling. You dare to spoil my karmic severing? Thankfully, you left some clues behind that I noticed, nor are you capable of causing my technique to backfire against me. The heavens are large and the earth is wide, but do you really think you can escape me? Around Meng Hao, everything was silent and unmoving. Chapter 423, A Fortunate Chance. Meng Hao had practiced cultivation for many years. From the day his journey began on Mount Daking all the way until now, he had experienced many deadly situations. However, this particular crisis was the greatest he had ever experienced by far. The consequences of killing one of the sons of Ji had been enormous. Recently, he had sensed signs that the Mastiff might be beginning to awaken, which gave him a bit of confidence. Except now. Having seen the old earthworm man's death, Meng Hao knew that there was absolutely no way for him to fight back against this unheard of karmic severing. His face was pale as he realized that everything around him was once again completely still. The members of the 5 great tribes, the neo-demons, even the clouds in the sky were completely motionless. Only the fishing line and Meng Hao could move. He shot as quickly as possible through the golden light, passing through the massive doors with all the speed he could muster. He exploded with the power of the great circle of the gold core, vanishing inside. However, even as Meng Hao entered the doors, the fishing line came in after him. The speed with which it moved was incredible as it followed him. This door was no teleportation device, but rather a passageway. When Meng Hao emerged from the other side, he saw that he was surrounded by mountains. These mountains were a murky golden color, and a faintly discernible pressure could be felt from them. In the distance in front of him were a collection of mountains that had no peaks, but rather gaping holes at the top. What appeared to be scorching heat billowed out from the holes. These were volcanoes. In total, there were 7 of them, all linked together. This place was the Crow Divinity Tribe's holy land, and also the domain of the Golden Crow. After entering, Meng Hao didn't pause for even a moment. However, even as he shot forward, the air around him started to fill with what looked like cracks. The cracks emanated a fearsome qi. Meng Hao got the feeling that if he ran into one of them, his body would most likely be torn into pieces. Meng Hao could actually sense a strange qi filling this entire volcanic realm. It was strange and multifarious, as if countless neo-demons were present. As Meng Hao flew forward, he suddenly caught sight of a black wind off in the distance. It seemed as if it sensed his encroachment into this area, and was flying to intercept him. This black wind was actually composed of countless black crows. There were more than 1,000 of them, blotting out the sky as they flew. Their speed was incredible, and as they neared, Meng Hao could see that their eyes were bright red and filled with frenzy. In fact, from the cultivation base ripples emanating out from the more than 1,000 crows, Meng Hao could tell that they were level 7, comparable to the early core formation stage. There were even 10 of them who were level 9. Meng Hao's face flickered. However, it was at this point that the silver fishing line shot out into the Crow Divinity Holy Land. It emanated an intense rumbling that spread out with the power of stillness. Soon, everything within the Crow Divinity Holy Land began to grow quiet and still. The grass stopped swaying, and the cracks appearing in the air suddenly seemed to have been slowed to a standstill. As for the approaching flock of black crows, it stopped moving completely. Even the waves of heat erupting from the volcanoes ceased moving. However, up ahead, in the centermost of the 7 volcanoes, was a location that seemed to be a point of freedom within all the stillness. There's life force there, thought Meng Hao, his eyes glittering. He immediately began to fly in that direction. Behind him, the silver line pursued at incredible speed. At its end could just barely be seen the glint of what must be a hook. This takes some time to describe, but happened extremely quickly. Meng Hao exploded forward with all the power of his cultivation base. He used the bloodburst flash without hesitation, causing him to flicker in and out of the air as he moved. He moved in jumps of hundreds of meters, not holding anything back in this moment of grave crisis. In the blink of an eye, he was directly next to the flock of motionless black crows. He was just about to continue on his way, when suddenly he felt a tremor in his heart. Because of the presence of the fishing line, everything has stopped moving, even these neo-demons. You could say that this is the kind of opportunity that comes around only once in 1,000 years. In the entire time that the Crow Divinity Holy Land has existed, something like this has most likely never occurred. It would really be far too much of a shame to let this opportunity slip by. It's a risk that I'm willing to take. His eyes shone with a bright light that transformed into determination. Immediately, he waved his right hand toward the motionless crows. They had absolutely no control of themselves as they turned into beams of blackness that shot into his bag of the cosmos. That having been accomplished, he once again proceeded forward. Behind him, the fishing line neared. Panting, Meng Hao bit the tip of his tongue and then sprayed some blood out of his mouth. His body flickered as the bloodburst flash activated, propelling him off into the distance. His face was pale, but he didn't hesitate at all. In an instant, he had reached an area that grew thick with grass. There, he could see a group of 7 or 8 poisonous wasps hovering motionless in mid-air. Behind them was a gigantic wasp nest which was surrounded by dozens more wasps. Seeing them, Meng Hao gritted his teeth, then waved his right hand. Immediately, the wasps and the wasp nest were gathered up. Then, his bloodburst flashed again. This is an extremely rare opportunity. I have to take advantage of it. Meng Hao was shouting inwardly, but at the same time, somewhat conflicted. This was a moment of extreme, grave danger, perhaps the most critical he had experienced since he had begun practicing cultivation. However, this moment of crisis had transformed this Crow Divinity Holy Land into an unprecedented bit of good fortune. This good fortune had caused everything in the area to become motionless, allowing Meng Hao free access to a variety of neo-demons. Such an opportunity caused even Meng Hao's heart to begin to pound. That was especially true when he happened to look into the mouth of one of the motionless volcanoes. There he could see an enormous lizard, half emerged from the volcano. It was dozens of meters long. Meng Hao was now even more conflicted. "Put everything on the line," he roared. His body flickered as he shot toward the lizard. With the wave of a right hand, he collected it into his bag of the cosmos. Then, he spit some more blood out of his mouth to shoot away at incredible speed. At this moment, it was almost like Meng Hao had forgotten about the danger to his life. Whenever he saw a neo-demon, he would shoot toward it and collect it up. One neo-demon horde and super-powerful neo-demon after another, things which had existed for countless years within the Crow Divinity Holy Land, creatures which no one had ever been able to collect even throughout all the years in which the 5 tribes had offered sacrifices to the ancestor. Dangerous beasts which normally could only be avoided with special techniques, were all completely motionless, making it extremely convenient for Meng Hao to seize them. A group of more than 1,000 green mosquitoes were sitting stock still within the mouth of a volcano, apparently just on their way inside to fight a gigantic crocodile that was half submerged in the lava inside. The mouthparts of the mosquitoes emitted a mysterious glow, and their bodies were ferocious looking, covered with countless fur-like spikes. They were completely shocking in appearance. As for the crocodile, it was bright red, with 2 pitch-black eyes. It lay half submerged in the lava, emanating shocking ripples. How many neo-demon hordes are in this place? Thought Meng Hao, his eyes widening. The twisted feeling inside of him could not be any more intense. Behind him, the silver line whistled toward him with increasing speed. It was no less than 150 meters away. Damn it! Meng Hao's eyes were red as he once again utilized the bloodburst flash. He reappeared at the mouth of the volcano, where he waved his right hand. Immediately, the mosquitoes and the shocking red crocodile were sucked into his bag of the cosmos. His body flickered once again as he fled away. By now, the silver line was about 100 meters away from him, and moving even faster through the air. The sense of grave crisis was incredibly intense. Meng Hao's eyes were completely bloodshot, and he now had no time to consider any surrounding neo-demons. Instead, he continued to head forward toward the apparently active volcano which was his goal. Except, even as he neared it, he noticed that up ahead was, shockingly, a burial mound. The burial mound was covered in cracks, making the coffin inside clearly visible. Inside the coffin was a corpse which was half human and half beast, completely bizarre in appearance. What set Meng Hao panting, however, was that laying on top of the corpse's chest was a wooden sword. The instant he saw the wooden sword, his eyes went wide. Meng Hao could tell that this corpse was not in fact dead. In fact, its eyes were open. Also, despite the stillness everywhere, he could still sense a threatening aura coming from it, and a powerful pressure similar to the spirit severing stage. This is the 3rd wooden sword I've found, he thought, breathing heavily. Having seen the sword, he knew that he must have it. Including his duplicate sword, it would increase the number of wooden swords he had to 4. As for the origin of this sword, Meng Hao wasn't sure. But his intuition told him that considering it cost 2,000 ultra-high-grade spirit stones to duplicate, it was obviously beyond ordinary. As for why it hadn't manifested its true majesty, perhaps it was because he hadn't acquired enough of them yet. Meng Hao had the intense sensation that if he did not take advantage of this peculiar situation, then he would never again have a chance to snatch the wooden sword from this bizarre corpse. Feeling both miserable and happy, he bit down viciously on his tongue, changing directions and shooting toward the corpse. As soon as he neared the burial mound, his hand shot in through one of the cracks and grabbed the wooden sword. As he wrenched it out, he could faintly hear a snarl of profound rage coming from the corpse. There was no time for any further examination. Meng Hao's body flickered as he shot toward the volcano in the very center. Almost in the exact moment that he entered it, the pursuing silver line did the same. Expand, the archaic voice boomed out from the sky to echo about within the volcano. Flee to the remotest corners of the earth and you will still be incapable of evading me. Meng Hao was only about 10 meters ahead of the silver line, his face pale. It really seemed as if what the voice said was true. Meng Hao was incapable of evasion. There was lava inside this volcano, as well as one location deep within that appeared to be a cistern. The rock surrounding the cistern had been chiseled into stone steps, which in turn formed a pool of water. Meng Hao neared. He passed through multiple restrictive spells. These restrictive spells were set up to prevent anyone not of the Crow divinity tribe from nearing. Any outsider who attempted to approach without the help of a Crow divinity tribe member would be killed. However, Meng Hao was being followed by the fishing line. As it neared, it caused everything to cease moving, even all of the bizarre and fantastic things inside of the volcano. The restrictive spells were also static now, and any hindering power was rendered useless. Meng Hao shot forward with all of the speed he could muster. From ancient times until now, he was the first outsider to ever come to this place alone. This event was unprecedented. As Meng Hao neared the Pool of Destiny, waves and ripples could be seen on its surface. However, Meng Hao had nothing to be happy about. His eyes radiated despair. Earlier, he had hoped that there would be something here he could use to fight back against the silver line, which was why he had headed in this direction. Unfortunately, it seemed that the pond was the only thing here. Nowhere to go. His gaze flickered about, and he sent his spiritual sense billowing out. After confirming that there really was nothing else in the area besides the Pool of Destiny, he gave a wan smile. The Pool of Destiny. It seems I have nowhere to go and no other options. Well, if I'm really going to perish, then I'll go out fighting. And I'll do it in this Pool of Destiny. His eyes shining with vicious determination, his body flickered and he stepped foot into the Pool of Destiny. The very moment that he did, the silver line finally reached him. It wrapped him up immediately, binding him tightly. As soon as the line touched him, Meng Hao's mind filled with a roaring sound, and he felt as if his soul was about to fly out of his body. It was as if his mind and his body were completely split apart. A sensation of icy coldness appeared within his soul. He suddenly had the sense that a deadly crisis was imminent. As I said, you're not strong enough to hide from me. Do you really think you can measure up to the people in the past who tried to evade my grasp? When I've hooked your karma, everything is over. Hold on. You already have traces of karma from the G clan? It's faint, and it looks like you're almost on the verge of completely erasing it. Since it's still here, though, I think I'll just take a look and see who you are. Let's see. Meng Hao. Killed one of the sons of G. Wanted by the G clan. Oh, so it's you. I guess it's just your destiny to run into me here. I might as well settle the karma you have with the G clan. I am G19. I shall bequeath thee with the G clan's karmic severing. Meng Hao's body was trembling. He felt as if his consciousness and his body were being ripped apart. His soul felt as if it were in fetters, as if some massive force were preparing to wrench it out of his body. 1. A similar name was mentioned in Chapter 310. In the original release, I translated it a bit different, but adjusted it later. He was filled with confusion, and his cultivation base vanished. Even his demon sealing powers disappeared. It was as if he was nothing more than a mortal, so weak that he could do absolutely nothing to fight back. The only thing he was aware of were the words spoken by the archaic voice, which echoed about in his head. Karmic severing. He could vaguely see a vast assortment of faint, flickering threads connected to his body. These threads were his fate and karma, massed together and stretching out into the air, connected to who knew what. Suddenly, Meng Hao could see that deep within him, a power was spreading out to these threads, and to his very life force. "Sever," said the archaic voice. The instant the word came out of his mouth, the world shook as if it were being struck with lightning. Meng Hao's body trembled violently as he watched the threads connected to his body beginning to collapse, as if some intangible blade were beginning to chop through them. They shattered, causing a chain reaction which destroyed even more of the threads. It was impossible to say whose memories these threads connected to, but in this instant, they were falling into pieces. It didn't matter how much distance was involved, the threads were destroyed. The effect began to spread about throughout all the lands of South Heaven. In the western desert, outside the golden light, everything was completely still. All the members of the 5 great crow divinity tribes suddenly shivered. Their faces went pale and filled with blankness. Within their memories, any trace of Meng Hao was erased, almost as if it were completely severed away. Wu Ling, Wu Chen, Wu Hai, all of the tribe members from the 5 great tribes suddenly had not even a scrap of a memory of Meng Hao within their minds. Mo Li and Old Devil Wang, even Yang Song and eccentric Li Dao all trembled as the karma threads connecting them to Meng Hao were destroyed. It was like a gigantic invisible blade was slashing down. As it headed toward the man-form outlander beast, it met up against a powerful force that struggled back against it. The man's body shook, but in the end, the blade descended nonetheless. The voice of the parrot suddenly came out of the man's mouth in a faint roar. "Ji Clan Immortal, this time Lord Fifth will not forget." The blade swept past, slicing across Jiu La, erasing Meng Hao's existence. It spread out toward the Black Lands. As for the stillness, it did not touch the Black Lands. It was limited to the area in the western desert surrounding the Crow divinity tribes. At the moment, Black Land's Palace Dao child Luo Chong was sitting cross-legged in meditation. His body suddenly shook, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. He looked up, an expression of confusion on his face. In the Church of the Golden Light, the members of the congregation all began to tremble and cough up blood. Perplexed looks appeared on their faces, as if they had forgotten something, but weren't sure what. The invisible blade swept across the Black Lands, erasing any vestige that Meng Hao had ever been there. It continued on toward the southern domain. Currently, Fatty was contentedly filing away at his teeth and holding a pretty girl in his arm. He was murmuring something to her when suddenly his body trembled and his face flickered. He then coughed up 7 or 8 mouthfuls of blood. His face was ashen as he looked around in confusion. "What's wrong?" asked the girl, looking alarmed as she rubbed him gently. "Nothing. It seems like I just forgot someone." Weird. During this moment, it wasn't just Fatty who was affected. Chen Fan and all the other people within whose memories existed the image of Meng Hao, suddenly coughed up blood and then looked around in confusion. As of this moment, all traces of Meng Hao that existed within their memories were blotted out. All karma threads of theirs which were entangled with Meng Hao were crushed. As of now, their lives did not contain anyone who went by the name of Meng Hao, or of Grandmaster Pill Cauldron. "Damn it, just how famous is this guy in the southern domain?" said the archaic voice, sounding shocked. "There are so many people connected to him by karma." He sounded flustered and disbelieving. The art of karmic severing is a magic which consumes energy in correlation to the amount of connections that are severed. It was definitely an astonishing technique, but one needed to be careful when using it. Xu Qing sat meditating in her immortal's cave in the Black Sieve sect. It was evening outside. Suddenly she opened her eyes and let out a soft sigh. Her hand reached into her robe, where a small pill bottle was stored, within which was a cosmetic cultivation pill. It was at this moment that a tremor ran through her and she coughed up not 1, but a total of 9 mouthfuls of blood. Her face was pale, and she was shaking violently. She could feel the existence of Meng Hao within her memories beginning to shake and collapse, forcibly being erased. "No!" she cried. Her hair was instantly thrown into disarray, and she began to flash an incantation gesture to fight back. The only result was more coughing up of blood. "Meng Hao! Meng Hao!" Her cultivation base began to rotate rapidly, as she prepared to use all the strength she could summon to resist. However, even as her cultivation base began to move, she said, "Meng Hao. Who's that?" She sat there mutely, a blank expression on her face. She tried to remember who Meng Hao was, and why she was rotating her cultivation base. She could tell that her heart was in the process of breaking, and unconsciously reached up to her face. She felt tears. Why do I hurt so much, she thought. Why am I crying? Throughout the southern domain an invisible karmic storm raged. The raging tempest was strongest in the Violet Fate sect. Everyone in the entire sect trembled and coughed up blood. Chu Yuyan's face was pale, and her fists were clenched tightly. She laughed bitterly as she felt her memories changing. Meng Hao was being completely wiped away. She quickly lifted her hand up and then bit her tongue. Spitting the blood onto her finger, she began to write 2 characters onto the wall next to her, Meng Hao. However, after she wrote the character Meng, her hand stopped moving and a look of bewilderment appeared on her face. What was I writing? Pill Demon sat in his short mountain, looking off into the sky. It wasn't clear what he was thinking, but as the invisible blade neared him, he sat there and sighed. So, this day has finally come, has it? He shook his head bitterly, but a brilliant light shone in his eyes. He lifted his right hand, within which appeared a medicinal pill. The pill emanated an archaic qi, and was clearly incredibly old. If you sever my apprentice's karma, he thought, then I will absolutely never give in and become an immortal of the Ji clan. With that, he closed his eyes and watched in anguish as everything within his memories that existed regarding Meng Hao was turned into nothing but ash. The pill in his hand emanated shocking aura, which caused these drifting pieces of memory ash to suddenly be reformed anew, unaffected. Damn it, he has something like that as his master, echoed the archaic voice. It sounded furious. It's a pity my cultivation base isn't sufficient. If it were, then everything would be wiped out. The blade continued to sweep across the southern domain. However, when it reached the rebirth cave, the cold voice of a woman could be heard. A false immortal from the Ji clan. Do you truly dare to try to wipe out my memories? Screw off. The sound echoed out into the air. The archaic voice, filled with disbelief and alarm, weakly responded. He's even connected to that figure in the rebirth cave. Damn it. Damn it. Who else does this guy know? How come his karma is so hard to sever? Chapter 425. The severing cannot continue. Out on the Milky Way Sea floated an island. If you looked at the island from up above in the sky, it had the appearance of a turtle. This island had been quite a mystery in the Milky Way Sea during past years. It floated about here and there, surrounded by mists. Suddenly the floating island stopped, and an astonishing bellow of rage could be heard from within. Screw off. Bastard. I just fell asleep, and now you come bothering me? You think I want those memories of that twerp Meng Hao? Damn it. Screw off. Patriarch Reliance's thunderous voice echoed out, kicking up huge waves on the Milky Way Sea. The archaic voice anxiously said, how could something like that even exist? How do I accomplish this severing? How? He sounded completely flustered and exasperated, shaking because of Meng Hao's very existence. On another island in the Milky Way Sea was a stooped old man who was currently standing in front of an artist's easel, painting a picture of the tall, strapping man who stood in front of him. In the middle of making a brushstroke, the old man suddenly frowned and looked up into the sky. A profound glow suddenly appeared. People who exist in my memory cannot have their karma severed by the heavens of Ji, he said softly. He lifted his right hand into the air and then waved his paintbrush. A drop of ink flew out which then merged into the air. Suddenly, the entire sky in the region turned completely black. A miserable shriek could be heard echoing out from the void. The voice was none other than that of ancient G19. As the shriek filled the air, all of the cultivators who were affected by the destruction of the karma threads suddenly shook. The threads connecting them to Meng Hao suddenly began to recover. They returned from absolute destruction to form once again. In fact, because they were being reformed out of destruction, they were even stronger and more tenacious than before. Chu Yuyan's face was pale white. Her closed eyes opened, and she looked silently at the character Meng written on the wall. She slowly lifted her hand up and wrote the character How. Pill Demon put away the medicinal pill and looked wordlessly off into the distance. However, his eyes were filled with staunchness and determination. Fatty rubbed his head as he thought confusedly about past events. Suddenly, his body trembled and he gasped. There were now many more memories of the past. His face flickered as he recalled Meng Hao. Chen Fan was the same, as was the entirety of the lands of the southern domain. In the Black Lands and the Western Desert, all of the cultivators whose karma threads had been affected were suddenly recovered. Xu Qing gnawed at her lips silently. She looked at the pill bottle in her hand, and her eyes filled with deep anxiety. She now remembered everything that had happened, and was filled with coldness. She could only imagine the loneliness she would experience if Meng Hao's image did not exist within her memories. Within her silence, she clenched her teeth. She knew that power was the only way to truly resolve problems. She was now more determined than ever to fully fuse with the memories of Matriarch Phoenix, and increase the level of her cultivation base. Back in the Western Desert, in the Crow Divinity Holy Land, within the depths of the volcano, Meng Hao stood trembling in the pool of destiny. He, too, heard the miserable shriek. As it echoed about, he opened his eyes to see the silver fishing line turning black. The blackness spread, and as it did, the line turned into smoke and ashes. The ash and smoke spread out amidst the shriek. The sound of the shriek caused Meng Hao's eyes to glow with coldness. He hadn't been able to see what had happened just now, but he had witnessed the severing of the karma of the old earthworm man. He could only imagine the death he had just experienced. Killing intent radiated out from his eyes as he caught sight of an indistinct figure in front of him. It was the image of a cultivator surrounded by black flames, screaming as he struggled to disappear from this place. The indistinct figure was repeatedly calling out a name. Xue Dong Liu, it's Xue Dong Liu. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. His left hand raised up and placed the blood-colored mask onto his face. Massive, frenzied power exploded from his cultivation base. Blood chi emanated out in waves as he charged forward. Blood finger. Blood palm. Blood death world. They all appeared, causing massive roaring to fill the air as they descended upon the illusory figure. Meng Hao's killing intent soared as he waved his hand again. The lotus sword formation appeared. As it rotated, the power of time rippled out. Die! Shouted Meng Hao, his voice ice cold. His hand flickered an incantation and he pointed forward. The violet chi guillotine, violet chi garrote, violet gibbous moon exploded out with a roar, causing violet light to billow up. Without a face, a single word, the flames of war unify. Meng Hao lifted up his left hand and pressed down onto the mask. Immediately, a gigantic face appeared. It opened its mouth and spoke a voiceless word. A roaring sound filled the air as it shot toward the illusory figure. As the miserable screaming continued, Meng Hao charged forward, slipping on the Fang Clan glove. He punched, and a massive rumbling could be heard. Meng Hao's killing intent soared as he punched over and over again, more than 100 times. Each of these fists contained incredible power. Rumbling sounded out without end, and the illusory figure seemed to be on the verge of bursting into pieces. It appeared to have been sealed, rendering it incapable of making any moves whatsoever. Even its cultivation base was weak beyond compare. It was still trying to disappear and escape, but Meng Hao performed another incantation, and the 8th demon sealing hex appeared. As the figure suddenly stopped moving, Meng Hao's face distorted with the desire to kill. None of his magical arts seemed to have any effect on this figure. And yet, Meng Hao was not willing to let him escape. He had killed one of the sons of Ji, and he wasn't afraid to kill this G19. That was especially true considering that if he didn't kill him right now, when he was at his weakest, then the man would no doubt cause endless troubles in the future. Gritting his teeth, Meng Hao pressed down again onto the blood-colored mask. Flag of 3 streamers, he growled. This was the most powerful magical item he possessed. Considering the current level of his cultivation base, he could, with effort, wield 1 streamer. This time, it didn't appear in illusory form, either. As soon as the words left his mouth, power filled the area as a long, blood-colored streamer appeared. As soon as it left Meng Hao's hand, heaven and earth shook. It shot forward, wrapping around the figure of G19, dragging him. G19 let out a horrified scream filled with shock, fear, and disbelief. This is the Mountain and Sea Emperor's banner. He cried out in alarm as roaring shook his body. Suddenly, what had been illusory, only partly in the same world as Meng Hao, was now forcibly dragged out. There, standing directly in front of Meng Hao, was an old man. He was clearly in very sore straits. His face was covered with a burning, black ink, and his aura was in absolute chaos. Currently, it seemed he was being forcibly repressed, and was now only able to wield the power of core formation. His face was filled with astonishment. He could scarcely believe that he had actually been pulled into this world. Impossible. It can't be the Emperor's banner. The legendary Emperor's banner was destroyed. What Emperor's banner? B*TCH, said Meng Hao, his face contorted with fury as he thought about how he had just basically died. Then he recalled what Shui Dongliu had said years ago, that people he remembered could not have their karma severed by the Ji clan. He was certain that without Shui Dongliu, he would most likely be dead. In his fury, he unthinkingly imitated the parrot's wording. With that, he clenched his hand into a fist and punched. A boom filled the air, and the old man let out a cry. "You trifling mortal, do you dare to injure me? You! Boom! Do you dare to kill me? Boom!" Meng Hao struck out repeatedly with his incredibly powerful fist, pummeling the old man until his body was on the verge of exploding. However, the man's cultivation base was fundamentally intrepid. Despite being attacked in such a way, his body was recovering rapidly. "Puny mortal, you injured me and dragged me out from the world of Ji. But just wait until I'm fully recovered. I'll kill you with my bare hands." Meng Hao's eyes flickered with coldness, and retracted his right hand. He glared coldly at the old man, which caused the old man to stare in shock. Then, the old man began to laugh coldly. The instant he began to laugh, however, Meng Hao's right hand flickered an incantation and then he pushed down onto the old man's forehead. "It would be a pity to kill you. However, your blood, along with the blood of that son of Ji that I killed, can help me to create my blood spirit. My recovery will quickly outpace whatever tiny injuries you inflict on me," said the old man, his tone vicious. Suddenly, Meng Hao waved his hand, and the lotus sword formation appeared. Rippling power of time flowed out, relentlessly pounding against the old man. The old man's face fell, but he let out a cold snort nonetheless. "If it were twice as powerful, maybe it could affect me. But that level of time power is simply not enough." "Not enough?" asked Meng Hao, his eyes flickering icily. He instantly produced his 4 wooden swords and stabbed them into the man's body to hinder his recovery. The old man was inherently tyrannical and haughty, but the instant he saw the 4 wooden swords, and especially when they stabbed into him, he had no choice but to scream miserably. "Damn it! Damn it! Those are immortal murdering swords. You, just who are you? How can you have so many? Although they're not completely unsealed, they really are immortal murdering swords." His injuries suddenly worsened, and his recovery slowed down to a crawl. Thanks to Meng Hao's many forms of torment, G19 was in an incredibly wretched predicament. "There's still more time to cause you suffering," said Meng Hao, coldness flickering within his gaze. Meanwhile, in the Great Tang in the Eastern Lands exists a luxurious mansion. Sitting inside was the girl with the explosive temper that Meng Hao had met that year, Fang Yu. She was currently wiping some blood off of her mouth. How could G19 ever have imagined that the effects of his karmic severing would reach all the way to the Great Tang in the Eastern Lands, and Fang Yu? 1. Meng Hao met Fang Yu in Chapter 309, in the events leading up to the end of Book 3. She initially attacked him, but backed off after seeing the mark on his hand, whereupon she threw an epic temper tantrum. Fang Yu's face filled with fury, and she rose to her feet. She was about to walk out the door when suddenly a woman's voice could be heard, shocking and furious to the extreme. It came from the restricted area in the back of the mansion. "Ji clan." When she heard the voice, Fang Yu's face flickered. She saw someone flying out from the restricted area toward her. It was an elegantly dressed middle-aged woman. Her face was beautiful, but grim. As soon as she appeared, everything grew dim, and the air itself began to vibrate. The land quaked, and cracks appeared on the surfaces of the nearby buildings, despite the restrictive spells that protected them. "Mom," said Fang Yu, trembling. She feared no one in the world more than she did her mother. "You, come with me," said the woman. This woman was none other than the woman who had appeared in the Song clan back in the southern domain. Her eyes radiated killing intent as she turned toward the Ji clan mansion which existed in the Great Tang of the Eastern Lands. 2. This woman appeared in Chapter 190 as well as subsequent chapters. It was in Chapter 193 that the guy from the Song clan speculated that she was actually the mother of the Resurrection Lily. "Mom, don't do anything rash," Dad said before that. "Don't talk to me about your dad. Are you coming or not?" The woman's phoenix-like eyes radiated intense killing intent. This chapter was sponsored by Carles Julia Cuevas, Nicholas Hahn, Useless 5, Night Runners, Von Neumann, Derek Washburn, Xredi Kumar and Pound.